Shell and protecting the rights of all those the workers outsourced, and also respecting and a recognition of all the international fundamental rights. And as I already mentioned, so you even admit that the contract workers do the most dangerous work. And you talked about the situation and the unfortunate the case in Pakistan in June 2017. And even in your reports, you say we must redouble our focus on safety. In other way around, this means that so it is still not sufficient what you are doing in health and safety. And you also reduce it to just lesson learning and also the figures of lost people. And the report that you produced never shows that you never checked if the private tanker you hired complied with safety standards. And this shows quite the big risk for the company, not just for workers, but also for the shareholders, for any potential the risk in the future. And another lesson learned as far as we are concerned here, and in the report you published, you admit that the Pakistani fatalities are not included in performance indicators. And this also gives us quite opportunity to question the figures and the reports you are publishing. This is quite important for all the shareholders and stakeholders. And one last point about this is, what about the supply chain management as far as you are concerned? Since we are talking about all the stakeholders, particularly shareholders here, then this Pakistani case should be an important situation where we need to learn about how to manage the supply chain for evading any kind of risk for the company. One last point. You refer to three values: honesty, integrity, and respect, particularly as base of strong the license for operate, which is good. And every year we organize our annual meeting of all trade unions representing Shell employees. We invited you several times to our meeting, but you deliberately refused. And the question is, how do you want to make a strong license for operation without having a dialogue with a global stakeholder, with all the unions? And do you think that this is something sustainable for the future of Shell? Thank you very much.
So let me take the questions around safety. And Ben, if you could refer to the contract situation. As I mentioned in my talk, we've had the lowest number of people hurt in working for Shell in history, but it's not zero yet. Our goal is zero. We work for that every day. I can assure you this company takes safety very seriously and is moving forward with every step, and I am very comfortable with what we're doing. On the tragedy in Pakistan, we are still in a deep learning situation that I described in my conversation with you earlier this morning, that we have to get to the cause behind the cause behind the cause. And so when we complete that work, as I mentioned earlier, we'll share it certainly within Shell and with other industry members so we can learn from that. But we know we have to learn from this situation. And so there is no desire whatsoever to hold back our reports. They're just not ready in their final form yet. As far as meeting with individual unions, generally that's done in the local countries where the unions are formed, not on a global basis. Ben, would you like to talk about contractors?
Yeah, thank you very much. And again, let me make a few distinctions, Mr. Kamal. So first of all, we have what we call a contingent workforce. So these are people who we have temporarily included in our normal operations, simply because we have a vacancy that we couldn't fill or because we have a temporary need to do so. That is, it's about 24,000 people around the world that we employ on that basis. These people are treated in the same way as normal Shell employees are treated in terms of their rights, their access to to tools, policies, and everything else. My suspicion is that you actually talk about contractors. So these are the people that over and above we employ from time to time to do certain activities that are either specialized and for which we do not maintain a skill, or that are simply, in terms of volume, too much to have permanent employees for. For instance, if we take one of our facilities down for sort of 4 annual maintenance, we have to bring in hundreds of people, and we do not have the capacity to have these people on the payroll all the time because the workload fluctuates. And the same is true for projects. These people we actually count also in terms of our statistics. They are treated in the same way when it comes to policies and injury statistics and everything else. And they make up, if you look at the total worked hours, about 65% of the hours spent in field activities. There is no difference to how they get treated when they are on the job. We have the same expectations about them. The same rules and regulations apply to them. By virtue of the fact that they do active work in plants, of course, they are exposed to risks as well, but they are treated in no different way than when it would be our own Shell staff. But we have not the capacity to take all these people that from time to time we may need to take them onto our payroll. No company could do that, afford it, because what would we do with them in the periods that we are not building that particular project or not doing that particular big maintenance turnaround or special job that we have? We do indeed, as I said to the question of an earlier speaker, have supplier principles. So we make sure that in the supply chain, the principles that we hold ourselves to account to are also honored by our suppliers. But we do not set the detailed employment policies, salary policies, pension funds, and everything else. That is for the employing companies who come and work on our sites. That doesn't mean that we therefore absolve ourselves from responsibility, but this is just how the industry, and I would like to say society, works in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. Of course, we have some examples from different countries, so it is not just specialized contractors. And you refer to the local level interaction, but in those countries, particularly where this is happening, there is no real mechanism and channel to be able to raise this issue. This is why we needed to bring this to this shareholders meeting. I believe there should be a kind of interaction and communication, dialogue to be able to raise those issues vis-a-vis with you.
If there is any issue that is of concern to you that you are aware of, then I would request you to raise it. We have plenty of staff here with who you can lodge this, and we can take that up later. Okay. I would like to think that in every country where we operate, there is a local organization. There is actually a contract holder in our organization with which issues can be raised. We actually have also helplines, which we communicate to all employees and all contractors who come into our site, where people can raise concerns. They're called whistleblowing lines or any concern lines. And many people do take that into account, and every individual concern or allegation does get investigated.
Number two.
Thank you. My name is Michiel Bots. I'm a mechanical engineering student at the University of Delft here in the Netherlands. And I have a question. My question is, how should I interpret the fact that Shell invests about 95% in fossil fuels, and how can I relate this fact to the goal, the energy transition goal of Shell?
So thank you for your question. Thank you for choosing chemical engineering, and let us know when you graduate. Clearly, we have been more transparent than I think other companies in our industry about our commitment to investment in new energies. We've said $1 to $2 billion a year between now and the end of this decade. These are massive investments compared to most just 100% renewable energy companies. So we're very proud of the investments. As we find additional opportunities that are good uses of our shareholders' money, we'll be increasing that. Thank you very much. Number one.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Loyo Grace Nyarua. I am the National Woman Leader of the Uganda Chemical, Petroleum and Allied Workers Union, an affiliate to Industrial All Global Federation. I am going to speak about workers at Vivo, which distributes and markets Shell products in Africa. Vivo workers wear uniforms that carry Shell logo. The law is very clear in Uganda that workers are free to join and form union of their choice, and the employer should not interfere. But Vivo workers are not allowed to hold union meetings at workplace. If a Vivo worker is talking to a union official about their rights, they are terminated. The pay is very low. Vivo workers are earning only $53 a month. We do not have minimum wage in Uganda, so the Vivo can pay whatever they like. Nearly all workers are casual and can lose their jobs without any notice and without any fair hearing. Workers who have accidents are blamed for being careless, and so they lose their jobs. Shell must honor their commitment to take responsibility for the workers in their supply chain. The question, Chairman, is, so when will Shell intervene to ensure that Vivo stops breaking the law and stops violating fundamental workers' rights? Thank you.
So obviously we don't break the law or fundamentally violate workers' rights. We do appreciate you coming and voicing your concern. If my understanding is correct, the company you're referring to, we don't actually own the company involved, but there's a help desk just outside here in the hall. We'd be love to get the specifics of what you've said, and be sure to follow up with one of our staff. Thank you. Number two.
Good afternoon. My name is Barnaby Pace. I'm here as a proxy, and I work for Global Witness. In 2015, Mr. Ben Van Beurden told this room that the company's 2011 deal for one of Nigeria's most promising offshore oil blocks was clean and bore no risk. He said, and I'm quoting here from the minutes, "We have never been anything but transparent about this. There is no risk or nothing extraordinary about this transaction that should concern our shareholders," and he called the deal morally okay. Last year, I asked whether the company stood by that statement in the light of Shell's changed position on the deal when last year it admitted in public statements to the press that the company knew its payment for the block, quote, would compensate Malibu, a front company for the former oil minister of Nigeria, who is also a convicted money launderer, it should be noted. Shell had previously stated that Shell was not aware that the money was to be paid to Malibu. That's another quote from a Shell spokesperson. But after my organisation published leaked internal Shell emails showing senior Shell executives were briefed that money would be paid to Mr. Atete, the former oil minister, and he would likely use that money for massive bribes, including to the then Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan. Last year, Mr. Holday did not confirm or deny Mr. Van Beurden's position, that there was no risk, and that the deal bore no risk and was morally okay. I note on page 176 of this year's annual report that specific risks are disclosed around the ongoing trial over the case in Milan, which, as you know, was sent by a preliminary court judge, remanded to trial in December last year, and you'll note that the prosecutor in the case alleges that $520 million out of Shell's deal went as bribes. Other investigations are going on in the Netherlands and elsewhere, and criminal charges have been filed against a Shell subsidiary in Nigeria. As far as I can see, the situation is unprecedented. No company the size of Shell has ever stood trial for corruption that I'm aware of. Finally, as you mentioned earlier in your presentation, in March this year, I had a quite extraordinary day when I received an email from the company's press team telling me that Peter Robinson, the former vice president for Sub-Saharan Africa Commercial, who's on trial alongside Shell in Italy, may have received kickbacks on another Nigerian deal in around 2011. That omission, I understand, followed police searches of Mr. Robinson's home in Australia and the freezing of Swiss bank accounts reportedly holding millions of Swiss francs. I understand that the company is on trial, the case is sub judice, and I'm not asking for a commentary on the specifics of the case. However, in light of the company's remarkable changes of tone and story in its responses to this case, I would like to ask the following questions regarding its shareholder communications, its anti-corruption and its risk control policies, which I think have a strong interest to shareholders in the long term going forward. So would the company first like to clarify why investors were told at this meeting in 2015 that there was no risk from the OPL 2 for 5 deal, and how it's taking a decision on what risks the company bears now, if it has set aside any funds for those risks, whether the company feels that that statement in 2015 that the deal was morally okay set an appropriate tone from the top, which is an essential component in all effective anti-corruption policies when we're talking about a deal involving $1 billion payment leading to a vast bribery scheme. Finally, in light of the changing stories about this case and the discovery of kickbacks by a senior former Shell executive, has Shell commissioned a full review of the company's anti-corruption and risk controls to understand what went wrong to allow the company to endanger investors' funds and what lessons can be learned from this case? I note that in your opening presentation you mentioned there was a specific subcommittee set up on the Nigerian litigation. It would be useful to understand whether we're talking about this case or the other Nigerian litigation that's ongoing, and what actions the board will take to ensure that communications with stakeholders and that their own board are informed properly about what has happened historically in the company going forward.
Thank you for your questions. Let me be clear on the particular OPL 245 case. We made a clear statement, Ben referred to it in his opening remarks from our general counsel. I don't care to say anything else about that case because it's currently in trial at the current time. You're absolutely correct. The board sees this overall Nigeria litigation issue as important, and we wanted to be sure we're spending a full time on it and focus on it, so we did form a special committee last year. Special committee is a temporary committee. It will be in place as long as we think it's necessary to have that time to make sure the board is fully informed and the committee has time to dig into the details. On our general anti-bribery processes, we review that frequently in our audit committee, and we also have backup from our corporate social responsibility committee to look at ethical practices. I am very comfortable they're in good shape and don't need further review at this time. Thank you. Number one.
Thank you, Board Chairman and Board Directors. I am Comrade Williams Akwareha, the National President of NUPENG. NUPENG means Nigerian Union of Petroleum and Natural Gas Workers. And I'm here to speak on repressive anti-labor activities in Nigeria. It will interest this gathering to know that the practice of casualization and precarious work in the Nigerian oil and gas industry was introduced by Shell. Currently, Shell has about 2,000 contractors employing over 20,000 precarious workers. And these workers, some of them have been in the system for more than 30 years, with a renewable duration of between 6 and 12 months. Share through various policies and practices entrench anti-labor and union situation in Nigeria oil and gas. And these include refusal to allow unionization of contract and service workers, fragmentation of contracts into thousands to frustrate the efforts of union in organizing precarious workers. Shall make workers sign pre-engagement non-membership of union, and these precarious workers dread associating with the union. Shell treats labor relation issue with contempt and disdain to the extent of refusing implementation of rulings of industrial arbitration panel whenever it goes against the company. The wages Shell pay workers in Nigeria are so poor and very ridiculous. An average precarious worker is paid less than $200 per month, while a panel worker is paid over $5,000 per month. As a result of the prevalent practice of casual contract employment policy by Shell, the workers are denied collective bargaining power. The health and safety conditions of work of this work is disheartening. They are constantly exposed to hazardous chemicals, no personal protective equipment, no access to medical facilities, no annual vacation, no insurance cover, long hours of work with no time off from work. Even end of contract gratuities are also deprived. The question we all are asking is, why is Shell so mean to Nigeria oil and gas workers? Or is it Shell global policy to be anti-union or anti-labor? Thank you.
We've been very respectful to let you make all your comments here. Thank you very much for coming and being here. I think these topics are of a nature that really should be handled outside the annual general meeting. Again, our help desk just outside the door. If you give them the specifics, we'll make sure our people follow up with any questions you have. Thank you. Number two.
Yes, my name is Gavin Palmer. I'm an individual investor, institutional investor. I'm a former analyst, former director of the UK Shareholders Association and corporate governance since 1991. It's great to see you again. And thank you for following up on being with the honesty, integrity and trustworthiness. And I'd like to thank all the board for all their efforts in dealing with the challenges of such standards. And also like to acknowledge the speakers today for the quality of the questions in contribution to Shell. Unusually, I'm having to actually ask as a proxy for the UK Individual Shareholders Society ShareSoc, of which I'm a full member. This concerns the registrar and Equinity, and oddly enough, I had difficulty getting into the meeting to show that I was a shareholder of 50,000 shares. Do you know the percentage of shares that are held by individual investors approximately? And do you know what percentage of them voted at this AGM by proxy? That's the short first one. I presume not, because if you look at 218, it has indirect shareholders of BlackRock at 7.86%, but they happen to also be an investor of 6.1%. The two figures, if you're an accountant, don't match. Will you join the UK Shareholders Association and ShareSoc in lobbying the UK government to put the end investor's name and email address on the shareholders register that is available to what I term recognised shareholder organisations? So in terms of data privacy, I don't want to have all our shareholder information available for everything, but shareholders need to communicate, and via certain channels or via some kind of system, we can communicate easily to the other shareholders for when there's resolutions like the Follow Me, which I'm a signatory to. Are you aware, and this also applies to me, I've only received this report about 4 meters back, despite our shareholding, which is a paper certificate, that many shareholders do not get notification of the AGM or voting forms. The EU Shareholder Rights Directive has a clear intent that the end investor, this might be called the beneficial shareholder, should be identified on the shareholder register, and not just the nominee who's holding the shares and has the legal ownership of those shares on their behalf. So will you look at this and lobby and with the UK government to implement the clear intent of the EU Shareholders Rights Directive and hence protect the rights of individual shareholders?
So thank you for coming. I'm sorry you had trouble getting in. We'll work on that.
It's happened before. The last AGM I was at actually had, they excluded me from voting about £60,000 worth of shares.
But that wasn't us, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Oh, that's good. Look, in the interest of time, we're running very late. We would like to get the specifics of everything you're saying. Obviously, we're not going to commit here to lobbying, but we would like to understand the issue. Then there's anything else to add about our registrar or anything?
No, if you have issues with Equinity, please let us know. We have a help desk up there. I'll get your contact details. I think I have had your contact details as well, and we could follow up outside the meeting.
I'm Gavin Palmer, not Cliff Waite, but it is specific in terms of, as you can see in the shell, there's no issue of the number of total individual shareholders, their shareholdings, and a shareholder committee would be valuable in providing a shareholder's unbiased input, and that's something that's actually coming on in the UK. I must say it's nice to be at a Shell AGM rather than Royal Bank of Scotland. Thank you very much.
Number one.
Thank you. As you know, there is now a floodgate of court cases against Shell on a global scale. And these cases are bound to increase. In Nigeria, for example, there are several court cases. I didn't introduce myself. My name is Godwin Ojo, Director, Environmental Rights Action, Friends of the Earth, Nigeria. There is question of problem of access to justice. And as we can see, for example, the case of Iwereka and Shell, the court sitting in Nigeria, through a historical verdict, ruled that Shell is guilty and that gas flaring is a fundamental violation of the rights of the people and it should be stopped forthwith. As we speak, Shell continue to flare gas in the Niger Delta. The questions we are asking, when will you obey the court's judgment delivered by a high court in Nigeria? And the second question, when will you stop gas flaring in Nigeria? In relation to that, we also have this UNEP report that has expressly showed that Shell is guilty of the environmental degradation in the Niger Delta. We are also happy that Shell has accepted responsibility, and you mentioned some amount for cleanup. But you are in the governing council, in the committee to oversee the cleanup process. Why is that? We think that you should not be in the governing council. Civil society groups, environmental rights action have indicated that your position, your influence as a member of the governing council does compromise this process. If you look at the Groninger situation, you have excused yourself. Why are you in the governing council to oversee the cleanup process in the Niger Delta? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the trip and coming and making your comments. We'll take them into full account and consider them. As I mentioned in my earlier comments, our Corporate Social Responsibility Committee was just in Nigeria 2 months ago, fundamentally understanding what's going on. Hans, would you like to make a few comments on your trip, what you saw there?
Well, basically there was a lot of support for the efforts that Shell is currently involved in actually cleaning up. And there was even requests from certain local NGOs for us to help them actually, because some of the cleanup has actually been compromised again by other forces. And being in Abuja, talking to representatives of the government, there was actually also a lot of support for Shell's role there, and a commitment from the minister to continue to work with Shell to improve the environmental issue. And so I guess overall there's quite a lot of support for Shell's role, and actually a demand by many people for us to continue to engage, because there's so much experience and knowledge.
The question, when will you commit to obey the court order in Nigeria that has been delivered since 2005?
Yeah, I'm not aware that we're not following the law completely in Nigeria, but you're getting specifics that we don't really have the data to deal with in this meeting. We'll be glad to take the details outside and follow up and get back to you. Thank you. Number two.
Good afternoon. My name's Thomas O'Neill, and I'm here by proxy representing a group called Influence Map. And my organisation has found that Shell is a senior member of over 20 organisations which are systematically undermining climate change policy around the world. Now, the funding Shell provides to these groups accounts to at least $20 million a year is filtering through to the process of undermining climate policy. Now, this includes an organisation such as the Western States Petroleum Association, which engages in lobbying, including through the production of fake news in California and the West Coast. Now, my question is, if the board believes these memberships are acceptable, would you be prepared to release a public audit which shows that these groups and being part of these groups is a strategic priority of Shell, and that your values, the values of Shell, are aligned with the so the values of Shell are aligned with the lobbying activities of these groups, and release an audit as BHP did in 2017.
So we take very seriously which groups we join and which ones we not. We do an evaluation. We don't agree with every group on everything they say. If it's important enough that we think we stay a member of the group, but come out and say we don't agree with that policy, we will. It varies in different situations. Some groups we've withdrawn from. I don't think this is the time to go through group by group, but this is a very serious process in the company. I'm very comfortable with how it's being done. Thank you for your question.
Could you produce and show this process publicly?
It's an internal process, and we feel comfortable with it. We'll be glad to talk to you about any particular action a group is taking, but we're not going to talk about the process here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Number one.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeanette van der Woude. I'm here on behalf of Amnesty International. This year, Amnesty did research into hundreds of oil spills along Shell's network of wells and pipelines in Nigeria. It showed that on average, since 2011, it took Shell 7 days to respond to oil spills after they were reported. This is in violation of Nigerian law, which requires a response time of 24 hours. Shell has blamed these delays, in some cases on insecurity, but in many cases no explanation has been given for these delays. Comparing this with the Italian company Eni, which operates in the same region, its average response time was 2 days, much faster, but still in violation of Nigerian national law. Shell's appallingly slow response times means that the pollution caused by spills is much worse than it should be. This is causing untold damage to the environment and is undermining economic and social rights of the people of the Niger Delta, rights to clean water, food and health. Assuming that Shell doesn't want to continue operating in violation of Nigerian national law, Amnesty has the following questions. Can Shell commit to a review of the reasons behind the delays, make this review public and come up with a plan of action to address the reasons identified? Thank you.
Ben.
Thank you very much, mevrouw van der Woude. In Nigeria last year, there were 71 spills to do with the operations of SPDC. 62 were caused by sabotage. We published that information on our website, or when I say we, I actually mean SPDC, because that's the company that does it. And we stand by the information that is on that website. And indeed, you're right, we are not able always to get to the spill site with a joint investigation team, which we do together with the Nigerian authorities. And in cases where we can't get there within 24 hours, it is exclusively because of security issues. I hope you understand the complexities of the Nigerian operation. We will not put our own people in mortal danger to have them go into an area where armed rebels will take action if they are being disturbed. There have been a few cases, indeed, where the number of days before we could respond was very significant. And in your allegations to us, you've raised one of those, the Obegungun example, where it took us 252 days to get to it, which was indeed because of insecure situations in that area. But let me also add to it that the moment we know that a spill is happening and we can't get access to the spill to verify exactly what is happening, we stop operation in that area. As long as we cannot get access to it, there is daily overflight with high-definition cameras to understand how the leak is progressing. We keep the authorities involved on a day-by-day basis so they know exactly what is happening. And in this particular case, the total spill volume was 10 barrels. That's 10 barrels too many. But the suggestion that there is a significant operation outside of control that we don't care about is perhaps simplifying the matter a little bit too much. So we stand by the information. In areas where we can improve, we'll be happy to go into dialogue with you. We always respond to your writings as well with facts, and I hope in that sense you can also have a little bit of understanding of the conditions in which we operate in Nigeria.
So it's approaching 1 o'clock, and I am very concerned about showing due respect to the other 18 resolutions. So I must insist with Resolution 1, you be very direct with your question, or I'll have to cut you off. So I want to give everybody a chance. Number 2, sorry you got that lecture.
No, thank you. My name is Julie Oudshoorn. I'll do this in Dutch to keep it brief, then I can do it shorter. Het gaat over...
The issue is achieving the Paris Environmental Agreement. In the Netherlands, we're setting up heat networks in order to take heat from the port in Rotterdam, Pernis, and to take it to the households. The households then can save CO2 because they no longer have to use gas. In Pernis, they're using just as much CO2. But according to the European trade rules, ETS, Shell is getting additional emission rights for CO2 in exchange for that. So in the context of Paris, perhaps in Rotterdam and The Hague we're saving on CO2, but not at European level. How can you explain that there are investments that are meant to achieve the Paris Agreement goals if no CO2 is being saved? Thank you.
Ben.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Uithoorn. Indeed, that's right. There is a program around the port of Rotterdam to use residual heat to heat homes. Warmteoortonde, indeed, it's called in the Netherlands. What it effectively does is it saves the emission of greenhouse gases in households that otherwise would have used natural gas or would have used another source of energy. And indeed, under the rules of the ETS system in Europe, these savings can be taken credit for. So it's a small quantity, but there's nevertheless rules and regulations that are there, as there are also other rules and regulations where companies that invest in emission reductions, not in their own facilities, but in somebody else's facilities, under certain circumstances that meet relatively high standards, can take credit for the emissions avoided. That's correct.
So let me go to the other people. If there's time at the end, you can come back again. Number one.
Thank you very much, Chairman. My name is Ansel Roger. I'm the President General of the Oilfields Workers Trade Union in Trinidad and Tobago. Shell Trinidad Limited has embarked on a series of drilling projects in Trinidad and Tobago. For this work, Shell is using contractors who are using local labor supply contractors. Shell has taken the approach that it is not responsible for what occurs with these workers of these labor supply contractors, simply because they are not Shell's direct employees. This standoff approach allows for these local supply contractors to violate workers' rights, violate critical health and safety standards, and violate local health and safety laws with impunity. And despite the repeated claim that you are comfortable and that these workers are treated equally, the sad fact is that they are not in my country. Shell claims in its supplier principle that it seeks to work only with contractors that are socially responsible and who respect workers' rights. However, that's not what we see in Trinidad and Tobago. My question for you is, Chairman, what will you do to ensure that Shell upholds its own supplier principles in Trinidad and Tobago? And also, what will Shell do to ensure that all their contractors and local labor supply contractors in Trinidad and Tobago respect workers' rights, uphold high health and safety standards, and fully comply with the law in my country?
Thank you for making your comments. What I will do is, if you will give the specific details to our team outside, I'll be sure that the right people look into the questions you've raised. It's not appropriate to go into the detail before this meeting. Thank you. Number two.
Student environmental science. I'll keep it short. I'm not asking you to justify previous choices or sending me to the help desk. I'm just asking you to answer these two questions. Last year, you claimed that you're not responsible for Scope 3 emissions. Yet you have recently claimed that you have the ambition to set goals for reducing those emissions. And I know you've already taken bold steps towards the future. And I've read your arguments against the resolution, but still I keep wondering these two things. Firstly, what made you change your mind about the Scope 3 emissions? Why did you say that you weren't responsible last year, but why you're taking responsibility right now? And secondly, hypothetically, what would have to change on Resolution 19 to be acceptable for Shell? Because it very much seems that you're heading in the same direction. It feels like you and Follow This are actually agreeing, but still you're not accepting the resolution. Why is that?
So let me be very clear. The net carbon footprint ambition we've put out, we think is very comprehensive. It is certainly more comprehensive than what we had last year. But we think after more study, it's the right thing. And we believe if you a careful analysis of what we put forward does accomplish, I believe, what's behind your question. Thank you very much. Number one.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Khalid Bittin. I am a member of the Tunisian General Petrochemical Federation and the trade union of a joint venture between Shell and the national oil company in Tunisia. Our problem is that workers at this joint venture are not treated equally. Workers who have come from the national oil company or directly recruited by the joint venture are paid sometimes half the salaries of workers that have come from Shell Tunisia upstream. This discrimination contradicts Convention number 111 of the International Labour Organization, which says that all individuals are entitled to equal opportunities and equal treatment, the most important of which is equal pay for equal work. Tunisia ratified this convention in 1958. In its code of conduct, Shell says it complies with the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which declares that everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work. We have asked Shell Tunisia upstream to address this situation many times without any response. So my question is, when will Shell stick to its commitments and pay equal salaries for equal works? Thank you very much.
First, thank you for coming and making your points so clear. We would need to get to specifics of the situation you're talking about. Again, our team outside the door will be glad to take that down so we can take a constructive step. Thank you. Number two.
Good afternoon, Chairman. My name is Luke Bogart. I study environmental sciences in Utrecht, and today I'm here on behalf of Follow This. During this general meeting and in earlier reports, you have mentioned that Shell takes on a leadership role in the energy transition. You have also mentioned that oil and gas will be necessary for a long time in the future. Repsol has recently stated that they will not invest in new oil and gas reserves in the future and that their reserves will be empty in 8 years. With regards to this fact, could you explain how you still perceive yourself as holding a leadership position?
I believe on our leadership position, others will have to make that judge. But there are clearly steps that others have told us. We're moving on. We think the net carbon footprint, we think our movement around new energies, we think our thrust around natural gas are all leadership steps. We're not a leader in everything, but we're a leader in a number of items. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you.
Number one.
Good afternoon.
Goedemiddag. Alsemir Caribou uit Brazilië, uit Sao Paulo. SP, de Federatie van Rurale Gebieden in São Paulo. Wij vertegenwoordigen zo'n 30...
Chain of 26 United of Raise Energia, Shell Partners Enterprise. Why Shell allows that your partner has and demisses workers in going to rise salary campaign? Moreover, why fires trade unions, the leaders and the members of the Commission of Accident Prevention elected by the workers? When is Shell going to stop erasing from committing those illegalities? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. You're referring to a 50-50 joint venture we have in Brazil. Again, we'd be glad to take the specifics. I'd like to get a sense of the room. I noticed a number of shareholders have had to leave because the meeting is running so long. Is there a sense that we should move on to other resolutions, or would you like to be sure we complete here? Raise your hand if you'd like to move forward. Okay, half and half. Let's go fast. Number two.
All right, I'll keep it short. My name is Elina Hesse. I'm a small investor, and I'm also a Shell kid. My father worked for Shell for many years, and I've benefited from that quite quite a lot, my education. And I'm currently in the process of seeing how I can invest my shares most sustainably. And there has been a lot of focus on the timing and percentages. And I think that's good to have concrete goals. And I'm also supporting the Follow This resolution because I believe it can only be positive to have legally binding goals. Although I understand you need to be flexible as a business. My question is more on the how Shell will actually go about reducing this carbon footprint. I don't think there has been anything said about this yet, and what technologies they have most faith in. And then my second question is the Sky scenario in 2070, which aims for net zero emissions. It goes on the assumption that carbon capture technology will be so far advanced that it will compensate emissions. Don't you think this is a very big risk to take? Yeah, those were my two questions.
Ben, can you make some brief comments?
Thank you very much for your question. Indeed, it's very important to understand how we are going to do all this. And again, I would recommend you read the Shell Energy Transitions report, which specifies it in a lot more detail. But fundamentally, let me just say a few things about it, which is very important to note. We will not be able to get there by just cutting our so-called Scope 1 and 2 emissions. So these are the emissions from our own operations. No matter how much we cut those, we will not be able to achieve the targets that are consistent with Paris. For that, we actually need to change the product portfolio as well. So what we will be doing is shifting the portfolio more into gas, because gas has a much lower carbon footprint than oil. We will be introducing more biofuels in the mix. Biofuels can have a reduction of carbon emissions of 70% plus if it is first generation, or higher if it's second generation biofuels. We will be bringing in more electricity in our, and of course renewable electricity in our product mix by investing and selling renewable power. We will also be doing that in our forecourts at a very unprecedented scale. And yes, indeed, we will have to take care that some emissions that are in a way unavoidable to be created are being mitigated. So indeed, it is capturing CO2 from our operations and storing them. We believe, and many with us, by the way, including the United Nations Panel on Climate Change, believe that without carbon capture and storage, there is no hope for this planet to have less than 2 degrees C. And we will want to make a contribution in that respect as well, including on our operations. On top of it, we believe that we need to invest in nature in order to offset some of the emissions that will be very hard to avoid. Imagine all the emissions that still take place because of air travel, still because of people. Not everybody will be able to afford or will be able to buy an electric car. So there will still be emissions, at least for years, if not decades to come, and those need to be offset as well. We are going to work to make sure that we invest in nature-based solutions, and you as a consumer of our products can actually play a role in making that happen as well. So these are some of the measures. If you read through the report, you can get a sense of the scale at which this will need to take place in order to achieve a 50% reduction in net carbon footprint. You will be amazed the scale of these activities and investments. And then multiply it by 50 or 100, because that is roughly the effort that the world will need to do, because we are only 1 to 2% of the energy system.
Thank you.
Number one.
Hello. My name is Louise Rice, and I'm a shareholder. It's following on from what the CEO just said, because I have a question of clarification, which is, last year I asked a question about achieving the Paris goals, and the CEO said, quite honestly, that 1.5 was in the realms of the fantastical, 2 degrees was possible if the world made a huge effort. And today he says Paris is doable, which I believe must mean below 2, because I think he wouldn't have changed his mind on 1.5 so rapidly.